Welcome to the channel, a place where we come together to slow down, observe our inner world, and to explore the deep truths of life through the lens of Buddhist wisdom. This is not just a space to listen, but also a place for each person to return to themselves, recognize suffering, and gradually transform it into peace. In the journey of life, all of us have experienced pain, from loss and anxiety to a sense of emptiness that cannot be named. But is suffering something to avoid, or is it the doorway to a deeper understanding of ourselves and life? With today's topic, Buddhist perspective on human suffering, we will go deeper into how Buddhism views suffering, not as something negative, but as an essential part of existence, and also the starting point of awakening. When we truly understand suffering, we are no longer controlled by it, but begin to learn how to live more lightly, more deeply, and more freely from within. There are moments in life when a person suddenly pauses in the rushing flow of the world and asks, "Why do I still not feel fulfilled, even though I already have many things I once longed for? Why is joy so fragile, disappearing as soon as it is touched? And why, no matter how hard I try to avoid it, does suffering always return in different forms, more subtle, deeper, and sometimes impossible to name?" Suffering is not unfamiliar. It is present in every corner of life, in incomplete relationships, and the fear of loss, and the pressure to become someone, and even in the emptiness when everything seems to be enough. There are pains that are obvious, like a bleeding wound, but there are also silent pains that creep into thoughts, into long sleepless nights, into the feeling of being lost. Even in the middle of a crowd, people often try to escape suffering. We become busier, seek more, consume more, hoping that one day, if we have enough conditions, enough success, enough love, suffering will disappear. But the more we run, the more exhausted we become, the more we hold on, the more we fear losing, and deep inside, the question quietly echoes, are we searching in the wrong direction? Buddhism does not deny suffering, nor does it advise people to avoid it. On the contrary, it begins by looking directly at that truth, a simple yet profound truth. Suffering is an inseparable part of life, not to make people pessimistic, but to open a door to understanding. When we dare to look at suffering without judgment, without resistance, something strange begins to happen. Suffering is no longer an enemy, but becomes a teacher. It points out the invisible attachments that we have never noticed. It reflects the desires, the clinging, the illusions that we have unconsciously built. And in that very realization, a new space gradually opens, a space of awakening. Perhaps what causes human suffering is not the circumstances themselves, but the way we perceive and respond to them. An event happens, but our mind immediately assigns to it stories, worries, assumptions about the future. We do not experience pain just once, but repeat it many times in our thoughts, and then we believe that is reality. But what if there is another way to live? What if there is a path not to eliminate suffering, but to understand and transcend it from within? Buddhist perspective on human suffering is not just a topic for reflection, but a journey of returning to our own mind. There is no judgment, no pressure to become perfect. There is only observation, understanding, and a transformation that unfolds naturally, like water settling after waves. When we begin to understand that suffering is not something to be eliminated, but something to be fully seen, Then, in that very moment, a profound change has begun, not loud, not sudden, but enough to soothe the unrest that once dominated life. And perhaps this journey is not about seeking something new, but about letting go of what is no longer necessary: expectations, attachments, fears. When those layers are gradually removed, what remains is not emptiness, but a peace that has always been present. In that stillness, a person is no longer carried away by suffering as before, not because suffering disappears, but because we have learned not to let it define us. And from that, a new way of living is born, lighter, deeper, and freer from within. If the opening is the doorway into awareness of suffering, then the main body is the journey into its nature, a journey not to find a way to escape, but to clearly see what has long been obscured by ignorance and habit. In Buddhist teachings, suffering is not a random or meaningless phenomenon. It has causes, it has a process, and it also has a path to cessation. But what is important is this: suffering is not only found in major events such as loss, illness, or separation. It is also present in very ordinary things, and never feeling enough, and always wanting things to be different from how they are. There is a subtle truth that few people realize. Humans do not only suffer because of what they lack, but also because of what they already have. When we have not yet achieved what we desire, we suffer from lack. But when we have achieved it, we begin to fear losing it. Before joy can fully settle, anxiety quietly appears, and so the human mind becomes trapped in an endless loop, desiring, achieving, fearing, and then desiring again. Buddhism calls this attachment a state in which we cling to everything as if it were permanent. We cling to emotions, to people, to status, even to our thoughts about ourselves. But the nature of everything in life is impermanence, always changing, always moving. Nothing remains forever in a fixed state. It is this contradiction that creates suffering. We try to hold on to what cannot be held and reject what cannot be avoided. When a relationship changes, we suffer. When time fades youth, we feel uneasy. When life does not go as we wish, we feel disappointed. But perhaps the problem is not change itself, but our lack of acceptance of that change. One of the deepest insights of the Buddhist perspective is that suffering does not lie entirely in the external world, but is largely created by how the mind responds to it. The same situation can be experienced completely differently tied to people. One feels hurt, while the other sees it as an opportunity for growth. This shows that perception is what determines the quality of our experience. But perception is not something that can easily be changed. It is formed by habits, by memories, by beliefs accumulated over many years. The mind operates like an automatic machine, constantly analyzing, comparing, judging, and in doing so, it often creates more suffering rather than liberation. For example, when an unpleasant emotion arises, instead of simply recognizing it, we begin to think, "Why do I feel this way? What does this mean? Will it last forever?" These thoughts do not reduce the original emotion, but make it more complex and heavier. Buddhism offers a completely different approach. Instead of trying to control or eliminate suffering, observe it with awareness. When an emotion arises, simply recognize it. This is sadness, this is anxiety, without adding any story to it. In that observation, a distance gradually appears between the observer and the emotion, This distance is the key. When we no longer identify ourselves with the emotion, he began to realize that emotions are just temporary phenomena, coming and going like clouds passing through the sky. We do not need to resist them, nor do we need to hold on to them. We simply see them clearly and allow them to naturally fade away. Gradually, through this practice, the mind becomes lighter. Automatic reactions begin to slow down. Moments of stillness appear more often, and within that stillness, a new kind of wisdom begins to arise, a wisdom that does not come from thinking, but from direct experience. This wisdom allows us to clearly see the nature of all phenomena, impermanence, the absence of a fixed self, and that nothing truly belongs to us. When this is understood, attachment naturally begins to loosen. And when there is no more clinging, suffering has nothing to hold on to. But this does not mean that life becomes perfect or free from difficulty. The difference lies in how we face those difficulties. Instead of reacting with fear or resistance, we begin to meet everything with a calmer mind, not because we become indifferent, but because we understand that everything is unfolding according to its nature, and within that understanding, a deep freedom begins to emerge, a freedom that does not depend on circumstances, that is not controlled by external changes. It is a freedom that comes from within, where suffering is no longer a burden, but becomes part of the journey of growth and awakening. And then, as the journey passes through the deeper layers of suffering, a person begins to realize something that seems very simple yet is incredibly difficult to see. Suffering has never truly been the enemy. It does not come to punish, nor does it exist to make us collapse. It comes as a quiet reminder that something within us has not yet been properly understood, not yet been fully seen. Perhaps in the past, whenever we faced suffering, we often asked, "How can I escape this?" But after listening and reflecting more deeply, that question begins to change. We no longer rush to run away, but start to ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" This subtle shift opens up an entirely different direction, a direction no longer based on resistance, but on understanding. When we stop resisting suffering, something strange happens. It begins to lose its power, not because the circumstances change, but because the way we relate to them has changed. Things that once made us anxious no longer have the same hold over us. Emotions that once carried us away now become gentle waves, arising and passing within quiet awareness. That is the moment when a person begins to touch a deeper kind of peace, a peace that does not depend on whether life is favorable or not. Even if there are still changes on the outside, inside there is already a stable anchor, a place we can return to at any time, without conditions, without searching. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is not the complete elimination of suffering, but that we are no longer afraid of it. When there is no fear, there is no control over us. When there is no control, we begin to live more freely, not freedom in the sense of doing whatever we want, but freedom from the invisible constraints of the mind. That freedom is not loud or showy. It appears in very ordinary moments, when we can sit still without needing to do anything, when we can smile without a reason, when we can accept an imperfect day without feeling disappointed. It is a quiet kind of freedom, yet enough to transform the entire way we experience life. If you have followed this journey to this point, perhaps you have already felt something, maybe a sense of lightness, a moment of stillness, or simply a new perspective on familiar things in life. And that, no matter how small, is already an important step forward. The journey of understanding suffering is not one with an ending. It is a continuous process, little by little, each day, moment by moment. And in that process, what matters is not whether you move fast or slow, but whether you are truly present with yourself. If these reflections have resonated with you, leave a comment below. No need for it to be long, just a thought, a feeling, or even a question you are carrying. Sometimes the act of writing itself is a way to see more clearly what is happening inside. And if you wish to continue exploring the depths of the mind, the gentle yet profound perspectives of Buddhist wisdom, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journeys. Each video is an invitation to pause, to listen, and to return to yourself in a world that never stops moving. Because in the end, what each person is truly seeking is not a perfect life, but a mind quiet enough not to be swept away by the imperfections of life. And in that stillness, you may realize that peace has never been far away. It has always been here, in every breath, every moment, every simple yet profound awareness. You only need to pause and truly see.